Welcome back to episode 9 of A Guy Learning How to Draw, podcast of me teaching myself how to draw and talking about it on this video podcast. So this is a bit of a different format than I've been doing so far. It's a bit of basically a running commentary while we look at the time lapse of the piece that I've been working on this week. This episode will take us up to the end of the penciling stage for this piece, and then I'll do a separate one, or actually possibly back into a regular format podcast while I do the inking, or at least part of it anyway. So I'll just, like I say, do a running commentary while I'm working on the drawing in really, really fast motion in the background. Captured at 4 frames a second, and then sped up by 2, so it's about 2 times that fast, so pretty fast. So basically at this point, I'm actually backed up a little bit into what I was looking at in episode 8 while I was doing the blue line before I went and tightened it with pencil, which is the process that I've been doing lately, which is to blue line things first, then pencil it, and then go to ink, rather than going directly from blue line to ink, which I mean, I probably will work back into, but this sort of like intermediate penciling stage is something that I'm enjoying right now to kind of tighten things up as I go. So in this stage, you can kind of still see where I was doing those compositional guidelines from the corners and from the center points to kind of break the panel up into, or the workspace up into thirds. And at this stage in the game, I'd kind of placed the characters for the scene at the convergence of some of those 1/3 marks, which is something I talked about in the last episode. And I started laying out here the environment, which is going to be kind of this Egyptian-like or Greek-like temple, kind of Parthenon-style thing. So I was working out the spacing of all of the pillars at this point. So I put a bunch of work into laying out these pillars and where the horizon lines were to try to kind of, put things into a nice 1-point vanishing point perspective. It's kind of 2-point perspective, but the building, you only really see one part of it. But as soon as I finished this stage of kind of rough layout, with this piece at least so far, I've been working on it in small 30 minutes to 1 hour chunks, and that's given me the opportunity to step away from it and then come back and go, what's wrong, what's not working. So you can kind of see here where, as I lay out start penciling in some of these pillars and trying to make them all different and stuff like that, that the positioning of the figures in the foreground, which I quite liked the rendering of so far. So oftentimes I'm guilty of rendering something and then not wanting to go back on it if it's really good, which I know, even if that rendering of that hand or that person or that body or whatever is where you like it, if it just doesn't work in the piece, it's not worth finishing. So in this case, I was actually able to go backwards, not on the rendering of the figures, but on the background, and redo the background after I'd actually started penciling in some of the character. Oh, here, this is actually kind of interesting. I was trying to find some sort of interesting headdress. I came across something online that was pretty close to what I'm trying here. Kind of like I was searching for just Egyptian headdresses, and I came across this big, kind of scary horned version, which is kind of cool. So kind of has this shredder element to the helmet, and really kind of helps fill out that vertical space. I thought I actually positioned her a little too low for that 1/3 mark, so putting the great big giant tall headdress on it kind of helped bring up the point of focus a little bit higher. So you can start to see here where the positioning of the man that she's cutting his head off here, and her doesn't work with the background. It's just not lining up. So here I've actually jumped, I've already erased that original background and adjusted the vanishing point lower on the horizon so that the figures that I'd already drawn line up better with the building, and it looks more like you're actually there rather than them being floating in a space that doesn't make sense. So there I was just filling in a flowing robe, which I hadn't really planned on, but it just worked with the composition. I just felt like it needed something to really help illustrate motion and also fill up some of the center of the composition to kind of balance out the frame a little bit more. So here now the ground kind of feels like more like they are actually sitting on that step in 3D space. This is a muscular model that muscle model that I picked up actually at San Diego Comic-Con this year. I'm going to talk about it a little bit further in a later episode, and some of the options that you can have with those, and really handy in rendering muscle structures on bodies, which is super handy reference just to have physically. I hate feet. Feet is so hard. Feet are so hard. But this seems to be working. Oh yeah, there I changed the blade to facing the other way too, so the curve of the blade is more in line with the curve of the action itself, which helps contain that point of focus into a circle, or to bring the eye back around through the action, through the two characters. The idea that all of the actions and all of the elements of the composition guide the eye around the frame to where you want the viewer to look. I'm starting to fill in the shadows here to indicate where the point of light is coming from, which I've decided is coming from the far upper frame right. So I'm relaying out the pillars. I was much happier with the layout of the pillars in this reversion of the Parthenon building, and I actually created it's a bit inaccurate in terms of proportions of not proportions, but layout of the pillars in terms of their distance apart from each other. But I've created a blank space between the ones directly behind the two figures, so that I can create a black fall off, just like as if it's fallen right off into black inside, to frame them. And I've also started adding other figures down here, almost like other parishioners or something that are all beggars, or maybe they're all priests or something, climbing up this step, and horror, with looks of horror and surprise that she has slit this man's throat. Whether or not, I haven't really decided whether this is like somebody who's begging for redemption, or maybe he's actually a priest or something. So here I'm using an iPad, which you can't really tell, but I've accidentally smashed recently, as all my reference photos. So oftentimes I'll actually research photos in advance and save them just in the iPad, and use the iPad to scroll on. You can actually earlier on, if you rewind, you can actually see me referencing the body that's on its knees with a photo on the iPad, which is actually a photo I took of myself. So if you look really closely, you can see how amazing my physique is, or not. Anyway, so I can use that to zoom in, spin it around, as you all know you can do with smartphones and iPads and everything. Really handy for drawing reference nowadays. You really don't need those folders full of clippings from newspapers and stuff anymore for reference. You just have infinite Google searching, which I find to be a pain in the butt sometimes. It doesn't really work very well for me, but maybe I'm just not good at Google searching. I had a lot of trouble with that pillar. I could never get that main pillar that I was just working on there. I could never really get the design right the way I wanted it in terms of like the perspective looking up at that curved pillar structure. This is something I'm not the best at in terms of really focusing on good detail in the background. I know I can draw it well. I know I can get in there and do it, but I'm just so impatient. It's not really fun to do. It's kind of like, I guess I would never have made a very good architect. But it is monotonous, especially when you have lots of detail like this and trying to make it unique and different in every single instance, so it's not just one repeating pattern over and over again. So again, I've moved over the spacing on that pillar, so it makes a little bit more sense. The black space is a little bit smaller. It's important to have a black space behind there to kind of draw the eye to the center of attention. Oh, here I'm actually filling in floating pyramids, which I decided maybe I'll make this drawing sci-fi, and it also gives me a reason to put something else of interest at that point in the frame, which is another convergence of the 1/3. So I've just roughly penciled in the upper right part of the frame these flying pyramids, which I'm yet to figure out what the bottom is going to look like. I guess I'll figure that out before I ink it. But and I've started filling in here. I was really struggling with that hand. I couldn't get the hand just right, which is so tough. Hands looking kind of forward at them can be a pain in the butt, especially because you can't really look at your own hand and reference that easily for that. And there's like infinite positioning of hands, so try searching that on Google. Sometimes they actually do have quite a few nice kind of like layers of different hand gestures from different angles in Google, so it can be handy. So another small little crowd. Their detail kind of fades off into the distance, and here I'm filling in shadows onto the steps to kind of really illustrate the 3D space on the steps, and also giving the steps a little bit of a marble texture with just subtle lines. So it also helps illustrate the vertical and horizontal planes of the steps themselves. So here's my example of how I'm never really quite happy with Google searching. Is I'm trying to find blood splatter and arcing blood examples from blades. I just really couldn't find anything. I guess you can see me, like, I looked for about 2 minutes there, so I'm probably just not patient enough or using the right search parameters, but it can be a pain in the butt to kind of try to find some of those more abstract references that you're looking for on Google. Sometimes I find. Nope, there we go. Got my references here, trying to give that one last pillar, some good 3D textures, so you really see where the sun's coming from. And I think I quickly just sort of add in some cracks and some textures into that, which I will refine in the inking stage. And again, refine these pyramids that are floating in the sky to kind of give it an interesting story element. So just wrapping up here, I hope this is kind of helpful, this sort of micro version of the podcast, which is the voiceover version, or the time-lapse commentary version. And thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.